By the afternoon of yesterday, I thought for the purposes of commemorating the Sobukwe month, as well as the Sobukwe day, I had thought that I had done my part, and I was going to remain to listen as well as to read whatever other contributors would put forward in this regard. But I'm sorry to say that I was made to change my mind in the afternoon of yesterday when I actually listened at the podcast discussion, which was very, very interesting and encouraging. Then I decided to pick up a couple of the issues that were being raised there. I picked them up without necessarily indulging in what I would call expansive or detailed discussions around those issues, and allowing these to be the subject matter for my attention in the near future, probably also the attention of other Africanists or attention of other Sobukwe Africanists. Number one, I think one of the greatest things that touched me very well, and I was very pleased that it was directly and or indirectly articulated during that podcast discussion. It was a question of treating Sobukwe as a human being and not a god. This is my, of course, own interpretation, and the wording is mine. This is to say that we have to accept that as a human being there could be areas that we may not fully agree with him, or as we have experienced the unfolding revelations of the issues of humanity after he pronounced on certain issues, we are indeed in a better position to say, no, we think here Sobukwe might not have handled this matter correctly. And by so saying, not in any way trying to discount or minus, subtract the excellent leadership role that Sobukwe played, both in terms of ideas, ideology, leadership, as well as action and sacrifice. The first one was with regard to the definition of an African, which Mangaliso had emphasized the question of those living in Africa, owing their allegiance to Africa, and willing to be ruled under conditions of an African majority. Critical issues there comes out from the question of who is an African. How can one become an African? This has been an issue that has been sometimes not being handled, or when handled, we can identify differences among different scholars. Some scholars, and one of the lead scholars in this area that I know of is Kwesi Kwapra, is looking at an African and defining an African from a social, cultural, and historical determinants, rather than the color of the skin per se, as well not from a point of view of citizenship. And we take it, when one takes that from a point of view of the social, cultural, historical factors, experiences, and influences, then we can be in a position to differentiate an African from those point of view, from what one could probably consider as citizens of a particular African nation state. This is important because at one point there had been an issue of dealing with the issue of Pan-Africanism, with some Pan-Africanists taking a position of what others have called a continentalist geographic approach, and those others taking from a cultural, historical, social, human experiences approach. The continentalists will, for instance, consider the Arabs that actually believe that culturally, historically, they belong to the Arab world. They've even members of the Arab League. And they are in Africa only on the basis of geographical place of dominion, or place of dominion or residence. But culturally, historically, social human experiences are part of an an Arab world, which is really centered around the Middle East. And they are Pan-Africanists that, of course, are looking at being an African from, as I've already indicated, from a social, cultural, historical experiences. And therefore, that's why those include not only people with these characteristics who are living on the continent of Africa. It includes those that are outside the continent of Africa, especially in the Caribbean, in USA, in the UKs, etc. So that is critical and important, therefore, that one would say that Sobukwe rather took a citizenship, if I would put it that way, a definition of an African rather than the one that I've already indicated. But of course, one should understand that Sobukwe was talking in terms of a post-colonial situation. He had a post-colonial situation in mind. And before, during the colonial situation, of course, a definition of who was an African was, of course, different even from Sobukwe's terms. And I think the issue is that the definition that Sobukwe had given is much more of a citizenship definition rather than a definition that actually defines who is an African from a social, cultural, historical experiences, as well as originality in the continent of Africa. So I thought that word was an important one, and it deserved to be mentioned and to be emphasized because one of the contributors raised this issue, not exactly the way I'm raising it, but within that same spirit, I think I am handling it now. And the second area, which has always been my part of concern to me for a long time, obviously, has been the statement from Sobukwe to the fact that in the new Africa, we will prefer a democracy as practiced in the West. That is, as practiced in the Western countries, which is essentially in the Western European capitalist countries. And this has always been my concern, because as we all know that in essence, the democracy that one is talking about there is but the neoliberal capitalist democracy under which those that are controlling capital are also controlling the state. Those that are owning and controlling capital also control the culture, the values, the education, the narrative, etc. in those countries. And those that are having this control are obviously a minority in those countries. So Western democracy is therefore a democracy that is established and controlled by the capitalist powerful minority over the majority, which is essentially the working class and those that have got no control over capital. So it is important that we should also clear that area Sobukwe needed to probably revisit. And we are here who are alive today to do so on his behalf, because the wheel of knowledge will obviously turn, and those who are there at a particular stage of our understanding of the world we live in are supposed to represent improvements and support and even corrections of some of the positions that we might have taken yesterday. And it is important. It is not a disrespect whatsoever to the contributions by Mangaloso Sobukwe to say, Lapa, my leader, you should not have considered it in this way, but in that way. And this is what one is also therefore saying in respect to the issue that we are dealing with respect to democracy. You will be aware that we are emphasizing as Africans today that we are opposed to that type of democracy, which is essentially operating in the societies which we have referred to as one-dimensional societies, where there is hegemony by dominant forces controlling not only the economy, but the culture, the thinking, the education, etc. of the people in the country. And by also controlling science and technology and turning the masses of the people as just consumers of products of the capitalist production system and not being part of the creative side of human life. And we have considered that as being part of the one-dimensional society which we oppose. And accordingly, therefore, we stand for a substantive democracy that is much more empowering in economic, material, cultural, etc. terms, as well as in the control of institutions, including the institutions of governance. That is what we have been emphasizing. And that is why, for instance, we've been rejecting the neoliberal, procedural, electoral democratic system that we have in this country. We've said a lot about that in the past. So that is the second area I think one could visit. And the colleagues did not touch the issue of democracy, is my addition. The second major area, obviously, that was asked, and which I thought was not, the question was asked and it was a pertinent question, but I think the contributors fell short in responding to the question, to the right, very important question which they have raised. And the question was, if this country let me put it this way, if Sobukwe was alive today and they say was the president of this country, how will this country be run? I think politically, economically, culturally, etc. What would be different? And I know that, of course, from the point of where one is as a decolonizer to a point where he institutionalized the post-colonial institutions, that will include things like the ownership of economy, state institutions, relationship of the people with the state, relationship of the state with the people, and the relations between the people or among the people, and how capital is produced, owned, utilized. There was a mentioning in passing the issue of socialization in the ownership and utilization of the economic resources. And let me just put this thing, when we deal with question of socialization here, we are actually socializing the ownership of economic resources. By socializing the ownership of economic resources, we are actually dealing with those resources being owned by the members of the society, not by the state, but by members of society, and therefore being utilizing different institutional or organizational forms, but with the ownership being in the hands of the people. Popular social ownership of economic resources or of the means of production. Nationalization leading to state ownership of those economic resources does not mean that the social relations of production have been changed. For instance, the relations of workers to the values they produce do not change. Under nationalized corporations, workers still work like workers do work under the capitalist system. They are alienated from decision making as to what must be produced and how the value created has to be distributed. They are alienated from the ownership of the means of production, as well as the means of consumption. That alienation, therefore, could not be considered in any way as socialism, and it's important people to realize how wrong in a number of ways, including this one, the Freedom Charter was about. As PAC, as from 1990-91, we opted from a socialization program rather than nationalization program. And let me surprise Africa to the fact that the Communist Party of South Africa, the leader of the Communist Party before he died, George Slovo, had moved away from nationalization to socialization. But the South African Communist Party suppressed this issue, this position, because already the PAC had already taken this position. And of course, within and among the PAC people, there were a number of people who did not know, who did not want to know, or who failed to know because of the usual disease that we have with the PAC of not wanting to know, to learn, to discuss, etc. Just want to end with the slogans and with the belief that we are the pioneers of everything, when in fact sometimes we have not. So the issue of socialization was put forward, and I would like to emphasize that therefore that is what really we mean by socialization as opposed to nationalization, state ownership. And let me also say this, and people also sometimes do not know, that the Marxists, Marx and Engels, rejected the concept of nationalization. Bukharin, for instance, rejected the concept, even called it statization. In other words, even the original thinkers in the era of socialism rejected the concept of nationalization, turning private capital, monopoly private capital, and turn into state monopoly capital, with the social relations of production and distribution remaining unchanged. That is what has to be understood in that regard. I'm saying, therefore, that this issue was mentioned in passing in the discussion yesterday, and therefore let me just make what I would have responded, but doing that briefly in terms of what sort of a country will be this one if Sobukwe was there and was in charge. We are aware, among other things, that Sobukwe was opposed to any form of totalitarianism. And what I've already said must be taken into account. And he and his group, because it is important to remember always that Sobukwe worked with other members of the Africanist fraternity. Here we talk of the likes Bo Rocks, critical revolutionary intellectuals, Bo Z.B. Mlide, Bo Mludzi, Bo A.B. Ngcobo, Bo Zephaniah Mtubing, Bo A.P. Mda, although A.P. was not formally in the executive, but he was there. So it is important that we have to understand that this was the thinking of those giants. They were emphasizing the blossoming of human personality. They talk about the emphasis of improving human relations to human, which they considered had been the problem in different societies in the world. That is, humans' relations to human was important to them. So if we take it from that point of view, then you begin to see what sort of the basic social structure, the basic forms of state institution that will, from a policy point of view, will have to be ensured to bring about policies that will indeed oppose any form of totalitarianism and informs and promotes the blossoming of human personality, improvement of human relations to humans. That is a question of no exploitation of one person by the other. And how that would become institutionalized, obviously, will be the practical requirement of statecraft, state-society craft, and state-society relations craft in that regard. Furthermore, Sobukwe emphasized in no uncertain terms his opposition and the position of the Africanists in respect to realizing the most equitable distribution of wealth and income in the country. And you cannot have this under a capitalist economic system. You can't achieve the most equitable distribution of wealth and income under a capitalist system. So from there, you don't even have to go to the specifics of the Africanist Socialist Democratic Society. But by looking at that, that will tell you what sort of a society would this be if Sobukwe and his colleagues would have had time to establish state and society relationships in this country. And then, of course, we also see Sobukwe making importance of how the process of industrialization will represent a situation whereby the income of the people would be increasing, emphasizing that, for instance, dealing with what one can call today the agrarian question, and how the agricultural sector and involvement in the agricultural sector and the need for industrialization to ensure that the agricultural sector does not continue to shoulder the weight of the needs of the people of the country. With more people, as agricultural technology improves, moving into the industrial plants as part and parcel of the whole restructuring of the economy of the country. Sobukwe spell up this clearly. That shows, therefore, this would have been one of his critical areas for effective industrialization of the country. And it must be emphasized that there will have been no place for the type of comprada elite that has used politics as a means of accumulation, that have institutionalized kleptocracy as a way of their wealth accumulation at the expense of everybody else, that have perfected corruption as a means of their personal wealth accumulation, that have failed to engage in economic industrialization in productive activities as a way of developing the economy of the country and the wealth of the country and the consumption possibilities of the people of the country, but who have looked at the political position and power they wield as means for their own personal consumption accumulation. That is the African elite that is running this country today. And there will be exactly no place for those people in my mind when Sobukwe would have been in power. What you are saying, therefore, in conclusion of this thing, that also, which was touched, I think I nearly forgot that one, It was touched in passing, and this is something that sometimes we don't give it proper analysis and interpretation and exposition. The positive action against the passes. It was not just a question of against this document. You remember sometimes it was called the badge of slavery. Now once you look at it as a badge of slavery, you will see therefore that in it was embodied all the economic, social, cultural, etc. forces that have brought slavery to the African people. And slavery is an economic, political, cultural, social, etc., religious, etc. oppression of the people. That's what slavery is. So when you stand against a badge of slavery, you are positioning yourself against those forms of relationship. It is important, therefore, and there is also one aspect that sometimes we have never given it the recognition it deserves. That is status campaign. What is the status? Whose status? It is the status of the African people in their country, the dignity of the African people in their country. And what brings dignity of the people in their country? The political, the economic, the social, the religious, etc. And their control, their dominion over all those areas as people of the country. That is what enhances their status. And therefore, when we look at what sometimes has been known and what this is going to be celebrated commemorated rather next month, we must be in a position to interpret this properly. What was the meaning? And among other things, of course, you'll see that it took place within a long-drawn program of mental decolonization among the African people. It was being handled within that broad program. Because to liberate yourself, you should first and foremost, or you must first and foremost, feel, first and foremost, accept, and have full confidence in your right of being self-determinant, of having dominion over your land, your territory, your land, your economic resources, etc. That is what it means to be mentally liberated. And we should therefore understand that from that point of view. Only those who value themselves, and I think this is important, only those who value themselves can pick a fight against colonialism of whatever manifestation. I repeat that. Only those who value themselves as a people, as individuals and as a people, as a nation, etc., can pick up a fight against colonialism of whatever manifestation. Whether it is secular, exploitation, surrogate, internal colonialism, as other people have tried to to disaggregate different forms of colonialism. But we're saying, therefore, no person in his or her slave mentality position which accept the position of the master can fight against colonialism. And that was part of the contribution of the like of Mas Liso Sobukwe. I just thought I should bring this forward, and as influenced by the discussions that took place in the podcast that I watched and listened to in the late afternoon yesterday, which therefore prompted me or influenced me that I should say something in response to some of the issues that were being raised yesterday, some of which were thoroughly well articulated, and there were also other areas that as I have indicated, which I felt deserve further articulation. And I've tried as brief as possible to attend to those. And we'll continue with these, of course, as part and parcel of trying to make the Sobukwe an Africanist, trying to bring the PAC back to where it belongs. And obviously it belongs outside the GNU. This is the year of great refusal to put the PAC in the GNU. Be with me. Allow me to end up there. I'm Sipho Shabalala. Thank you.